Have you ever been told you were too old, too shabby, too unworthy by your own family? That's exactly what happened to me. I showed up at what was supposed to be a simple family photo shoot, excited to stand beside my daughter and granddaughter. But the moment my son-in-law saw me dressed in my plain sweater and old shoes, he shouted across the park, "I don't want an old beggar in my family photos, in front of my own child, in front of my granddaughter, in front of strangers." Humiliation cut deeper than I'd ever imagined. But what hurt most wasn't his insult. It was my daughter's silence. That day, I walked away from their perfect little photo shoot. But I didn't crawl into shame. Instead, I made a decision that would change everything. By the time they stepped back into my house 2 weeks later, they didn't see a beggar. They saw the man they should have respected all along. They say time heals, but I'm not so sure. It's been 5 years since my wife Helen passed, and this old house in the outskirts of Chicago still feels hollow without her laughter. My name is Alfred Hampton. I am 67 years old, a retired civil engineer, and lately I have felt more like a shadow than a man. On that gray October morning, I sat hunched over my workbench, fiddling with a half-finished model bridge I had been building for months. My hands trembled slightly as I tried to slot 2 tiny beams together, and my glasses slid down my nose. With a sigh, I set the tools aside. The house was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock and the faint creak of old floorboards. I stood my knees stiff and caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. What stared back at me was not the Alfred Helen used to love to tease. My hair had grown wild silver tufts sticking out in all directions. The beard I once kept neatly trimmed now sagged into something scraggly and unkempt. My sweater stretched thin and stained with coffee clung loosely to my thinner frame. "You've let yourself go, Al," I muttered to the reflection. The kettle whistled in the kitchen, breaking my thoughts. As I poured hot water into the chipped mug, my eyes fell on a stack of unpaid bills. I could pay them, I had my pension, and the projects I once managed had left me with a comfortable cushion. But somewhere along the line, I had stopped caring. Paperwork felt meaningless without Helen around to scold me for neglecting it. That's when the phone buzzed in my pocket. Hardly anyone called me these days, so I frowned at the screen. It was my daughter Marissa. "Hi, Dad." Her voice sounded bright, too bright like it was being forced through clenched teeth. "I'm alive," I said flatly. "What's the occasion?" "Why does there have to be an occasion? Can't I just call my dad to see how he's doing?" I gave a short laugh. "Last time you called was when you needed the antique chest from the attic." "So what's this about?" A pause. Then a sigh. "All right, you caught me. We're having a family photo shoot this Saturday. A professional photographer. Graham thought it would be great for the Christmas cards, and well, he wants some photos for his office too." "You'll come write photos?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "You want me there?" Of course, she chirped. "You're part of the family." But her tone carried the same awkward cheerfulness as a receptionist rehearsing lines. "It's at Lincoln Park, 11 o'clock. Nothing formal, just neat. Family. Family." I repeated the word, sitting heavy on my tongue. I hadn't seen my son-in-law Graham in nearly 8 months, not since Lydia's birthday party. Marissa pressed on. "Dad, this means a lot to Graham. He's just been promoted head of marketing for the entire Midwest division. This is big for him." "Congratulations," I said dryly. "Give him my regards." There was another silence. Then she added, "Dad, Maybe stop by the barber before Saturday just to tidy up a little. I looked at my reflection in the kitchen window, at the gray mess of my hair and beard. Maybe I answered vaguely. We ended the call, and I stood there, the mug cooling in my hands. For Lydia, my granddaughter, I would endure it. She was the only one who came around, willingly dropping by after school with her backpack and a smile that reminded me so much of Helen. If she wanted me in those photos, I'd be there. But deep down, I knew Graham never wanted me there at all. That evening, just as I settled back into my armchair with the unfinished model bridge, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. At this age, surprise visitors usually mean bad news or a salesman I have no patience for. But when I opened the door, there she was. Lydia. My 15-year-old granddaughter, her backpack slung over one shoulder, rain boots splattered with mud, and a grin wide enough to light up the whole porch. "Grandpa," she exclaimed, and before I could say a word, she threw her arms around me. I chuckled, hugging her back. "Well, this is a nice surprise. What brings you here on a school night?" "I came straight from class," she said, stepping inside and tossing her jacket over the banister like she owned the place. "Mom's at some work thing, and Dad doesn't care where I am as long as I do my homework." "So, can I hang out here?" "The house is always open for you," I replied, smiling in a way I hadn't in days. "But you'll have to survive on whatever scraps this old man can put together." "Hungry, starving," she groaned dramatically, dropping her backpack on the kitchen floor. "Please tell me you have turkey and cheese." "As a matter of fact," I said, pulling open the fridge, "you're in luck." She plopped herself at the kitchen table, spreading her algebra book out, as I assembled sandwiches. I slid the plate in front of her, and she bit into one with the enthusiasm of someone who hadn't eaten in days. "Mom said you're coming to the photo shoot," she said casually between mouthfuls. "Yeah," I answered. "She called today." Her eyes lit up. "Good Dad wanted to go without you, but I told Mom I wouldn't stand for it. I want you there." I froze, knife still in my hand. "You did." She bit her lip, realizing she might have said too much. "Sorry, Grandpa. I shouldn't have." "It's all right." I forced a small smile. "I'm not blind, Lydia. Your dad and well, we've never exactly seen eye to eye. He says you're disorganized," she muttered, rolling her eyes, "and that you could have done more with your career." I barked a laugh. Maybe he's right. But I built bridges and roads that thousands of people drive on every day. That's more than a few marketing slogans, don't you think? She giggled. "Exactly what I said, Grandpa. Your work is way cooler than Dad's. You actually built things. Real things." Her words warmed me more than the tea steaming in my cup. Helen used to say the same, that my work was solid, honest, something no one could take away. Lydia had her grandmother's sharpness, her ability to see past the surface. "I like that you don't care what people think of you," she added, sipping her tea. I swallowed hard. The truth was, I did care more than I wanted to admit. Every time Graham wrinkled his nose at my clothes or avoided introducing me to his colleagues, it stung. Still, I simply said, "Well, I'm glad you see me that way." For the next 2 hours, we worked through her quadratic equations, then played an old board game I had kept from Marissa's childhood. Laughter filled the house again, echoing in the corners that had been silent for years. When the clock neared 8, her phone buzzed. She sighed. "Mom's done with her meeting. She says I need to come home. I'll drive you," I offered. She shook her head. No, the bus comes right down the street. Besides, she hesitated. Dad might be home, and if he knows I was here, he'll just make a scene. I nodded, my chest heavy. All right, sweetheart, but you're welcome here anytime. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. She hugged me tightly at the door. Thanks, Grandpa. Don't forget Saturday, okay? Promise me you'll be in the pictures. I promise, I said. And when the bus took her away and the house fell silent again, I sat in my chair staring at my reflection in the darkened window. For her sake, for Lydia's sake, I would endure Graham's disdain. But a part of me whispered that Saturday would not go as smoothly as Marissa hoped. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of sky that couldn't make up its mind. Thin clouds drifted past, carrying the smell of damp earth from the night's rain. I brewed myself a strong coffee, but even that didn't chase away the knot in my chest. My hands shook slightly as I buttoned the cleanest shirt I could find, a pale blue one, a little loose, since I'd lost weight. Over it, I pulled on a dark green sweater with patched elbows. It wasn't fancy, but it was tidy. Iris would have insisted on a shave and a haircut. But this wasn't for Graham. This was for Lydia. She'd asked me to promise, and I had. At 10:30, I set out on foot. Lincoln Park was only a 20-minute walk, and the fresh air helped steady me. The sidewalks were slick leaves stuck to my shoes, but the air smelled crisp, like autumn was clearing its throat. Families with strollers passed joggers, puffed along the trail, dogs tugged at their leashes. A normal Saturday in Chicago. I spotted them before they spotted me. Marissa in a beige coat, Lydia in a red jacket that made her glow like a bright flame, and Graham in a cashmere coat so sharp it looked like it had stepped off a magazine page. A young man with an expensive-looking camera fussed with lenses nearby. Grandpa Lydia saw me and ran straight into my arms. Just that hug was worth the walk, worth the nerves, worth everything. Of course I came, I whispered. I made a promise, didn't I? Marissa greeted me with a strained smile. Hi, Dad. You're right on time. Her eyes darted over my sweater, my beard, the shoes I'd polished as best I could. I caught the flicker of disappointment before she looked away. And then there was Graham. He turned from the photographer, and the smile he wore a moment ago curdled into a sneer. Alfred. Just my name. No handshake, no warmth. Graham, I replied evenly. The photographer, a cheerful kid named Nolan, extended his hand. You must be Marissa's father. Pleasure to meet you, sir. At least someone here has manners, I said, shaking his hand firmly. Nolan explained the plan group shots under the oak tree, then by the pond, some individual portraits. He seemed genuinely enthusiastic. Graham, however, pulled him aside almost immediately, speaking in low tones and shooting me sharp glances. I didn't have to hear the words to know they were about me. When they returned, Marissa stepped close and whispered, Dad, you could have at least shaved. You told me it was nothing formal, I muttered. Still, she trailed off, glancing nervously at her husband. Graham folded his arms and squared up to me. Alfred. I thought Marissa explained how important these photos are. She said it was a family shoot, I answered, heat rising in my chest. I'm here. I'm family. He looked me up and down, his lip curling. These photos will be displayed in my office. My clients will see them. My colleagues will see them. And what's the problem, I asked, though I already knew. The problem, he said, his voice sharp as broken glass, is that you don't fit the image. You look He paused, searching for the cruelest words. Go on, I pressed, crossing my arms. You look like an old beggar, he spat. His voice carried in the crisp autumn air. And I don't want an old beggar in my family photos. Silence fell. Marissa went pale, her lips parting, but no words coming out. Lydia's eyes filled with angry tears. How dare you, she shouted at her father. Grandpa's not a beggar. He's an engineer. He built bridges and schools. He built things that last. Quiet, Lydia Graham snapped. The adults are talking. No. She stamped her foot, trembling. You're not an adult if you talk like that. You're cruel. I laid a hand gently on her shoulder. My own insides burned with rage, but my voice stayed calm. It's all right, sweetheart. But inside it was anything but all right. My own son-in-law had cast me aside like trash, and worse, my daughter stood there, eyes lowered, saying nothing. I swallowed hard. So it's more important how I look than who I am. For these pictures, Graham shrugged coldly. Yes. That word yes slammed into me harder than any fist. I looked at Marissa, hoping, praying for her to defend me, but all she managed was a whisper, Dad. Maybe another time. Just us. It was like being slapped in front of strangers. Fine, I said, my voice shaking. I don't want to ruin your perfect picture. Grandpa, no, Lydia cried, clinging to my arm. I kissed the top of her head. Some other time, darling. I promise. And with that, I turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last, the words old beggar pounding in my ears. I walked away from Lincoln Park, with Lydia's voice echoing in my ears. Grandpa's not a beggar. Her courage should have comforted me, but the sting of Graham's words cut deeper than I cared to admit. Each step on the damp pavement felt heavier, like I was carrying years of humiliation I hadn't even realized were still on my back. When I reached an empty bench by the pond, I sank onto it and let my hands hang uselessly between my knees. For a moment, I was just an old man in a wrinkled sweater, staring at the ripples on the water, wondering how his own family could be ashamed of him. Passers-by glanced at me with that mix of pity and avoidance reserved for the elderly. Maybe to them I did look like a beggar. I clenched my fists. No, that wasn't me. I had been a civil engineer for 35 years. I had led crews, drawn plans, signed off on projects worth millions. Bridges, schools, hospitals, structures that still stood serving thousands every day. I had raised a daughter on an honest salary, bought this house with my own hands and sweat. And yet in the eyes of my son-in-law, I was reduced to nothing more than a shabby old man unworthy of a family photograph. Old beggar. The words twisted like a knife. What hurt more wasn't Graham, it was Marissa, my own daughter. She hadn't stood up for me. She had looked away embarrassed and let him do the talking. Helen would never have allowed it. She would have torn into him right there in front of the photographer. Consequences be damned. I rubbed my face, fighting back the heat rising in my eyes. Helen's voice seemed to float beside me, just as clear as when she was alive. Al, you've given up too soon. Maybe she was right. Since she passed, I had drifted. I wore the same clothes year after year, let the beard grow wild, let the house fade into disrepair. I told myself it didn't matter, no one cared. But it did matter. To Lydia, to how my daughter saw me, and maybe most of all to myself. I pulled out my phone and stared at the black screen. My contact list was thin these days, mostly doctors, old colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years, and one neighbor who'd never stopped checking in, Victor Russo. Victor owned a small landscaping business down the block. Always neat, always polished, he carried himself with a dignity that I envied. I pressed call. Alfred, his familiar gravelly voice, answered after 2 rings. "Vic, you busy tonight?" "Not really." "Why, what's going on?" I hesitated, then let it out in a rush. "Got kicked out of a family photo shoot. Graham called me an old beggar." There was a whistle on the other end. "That pompous son-in-law of yours, I knew he was a snob, but that's low. Too low." It wasn't even his words that cut deepest, I admitted quietly. It was Marissa's silence. Victor was silent for a beat. Then, "So what are you going to do about it?" "I'll sit there stewing or stand up." I looked at my reflection in the rippling pond water. The beard, the sagging sweater, the tired eyes. And beneath it a stubborn spark I hadn't felt in years. "I'm done stewing," I said firmly. "I want to teach them a lesson. Show them there's more to me than this." Shell. "What kind of lesson?" Victor asked, a note of curiosity sharpening his tone. "The kind they won't forget," I replied. "If Graham thinks I'm nothing but a beggar, I'll show him exactly what I can be." Victor chuckled. "Now you're talking. I've got some contacts, contractors, designers. If you want to shake things up, I'll help." I straightened, my back energy humming through me like I was 30 years younger. "I'm not just talking about a haircut, Vic. I'm talking about the whole house, the yard, even me. A full transformation." He laughed, but it was approving. "You sure you're ready for this?" "Ready." I looked out over the park, the leaves swirling in the breeze. I've been waiting for this without knowing it. It's time I stopped living like a ghost. When I finally rose from that bench, I no longer felt like the man who had been humiliated minutes before. I wasn't leaving as the old beggar Graham had mocked. I was leaving as Alfred Hampton engineer, father, grandfather, ready to fight for his dignity. And this fight, I thought with a grim smile, was only just beginning. The next morning, I woke with a strange sense of purpose. For months, maybe years, I had rolled out of bed without a reason beyond keeping myself alive. But now something different pulsed under my skin. Graham's insult still burned in my ears, but instead of humiliation, it had turned into fuel. Victor showed up at 9 sharp, carrying a yellow legal pad and 2 steaming coffees. "If we're doing this," he said, handing me a cup, "we're doing it right. Let's make a plan." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table Helen and I had bought nearly 40 years ago. Its surface was scarred with years of family dinners and school projects, but today it became a war room. First, Victor said, scribbling the house, "You've let it go, Al. The bones are good, but it needs a facelift. New floors, fresh paint, modern lighting, kitchen and bathroom upgrades, landscaping the yard." I nodded. "You're right. It's time." Second, he continued, tapping his pen. "You, a haircut beard, trim new glasses, a wardrobe that fits and says something other than retired handyman. You're not broke, Al. You can afford to look like what you are, a man who built half this city." I almost laughed. "That sounds expensive. You spent decades designing million-dollar projects. You've got savings, don't you?" "Yes," I admitted. "Plenty. I just never saw the point of spending it on myself." "Well, consider this your point." By noon, Victor had already made 3 calls. His cousin Tony ran a construction crew that had just finished a condo renovation and was looking for their next job. By evening, Tony himself was at my doorstep, measuring, sketching, tossing out ideas like confetti. 2 weeks, he promised, flipping his tape measure shut. We can have this place looking like a model home. You just tell me how modern you want it. I surprised myself with my answer. Very. I want the kind of place that makes a man like Graham swallow his pride. Tony grinned. Then you'll get it. That night, as I walked through my dusty living room, I tried to picture it the way Tony had described: warm gray walls, hardwood floors, gleaming under new recessed lights, furniture that didn't sag or squeak. For the first time in years, I felt excitement about my own house. The next day was for me. Victor drove me downtown to a salon his wife swore by. The barber, a sharp-eyed man named Miguel, studied me like an architect evaluating a crumbling building. "We'll start with the hair," he said. "You've got good silver in there, we'll shape it, not hide it. Beard, keep it, but trim it neat. Trust me, you'll look distinguished." An hour later, I barely recognized the man in the mirror. The wild old hermit was gone. In his place stood someone lean, sharp, with clean lines around the jaw and eyes that looked alive again. Miguel patted my shoulder. "See, not a beggar. A gentleman." Victor whistled. "Told you." From there we went to a men's clothing store. A young clerk named Jordan took one look at me and went to work pulling jackets, shirts, trousers. At first I balked: wool blazers, cashmere sweaters, leather shoes. But when I tried them on, I felt something shift. The navy blazer fit snug at the shoulders, the gray slacks fell just right, and when I laced up the brown Oxfords, I didn't feel like a relic anymore. I felt like the man Helen used to call her handsome Al. By the time I got home, my head spun from the whirlwind of changes. Boxes of furniture catalogs sat on the counter. Contractors had taped plastic over the doorways, preparing to rip out the old carpet in the morning. My closet held 3 new outfits that actually fit. For the first time in years, I stood in front of the mirror and didn't mutter an insult at myself. Instead, I heard Helen's voice again, softer this time, almost proud. "See, I told you. You're still in there." And I believed her. The following 2 weeks passed in a blur of noise, dust, and change. Every morning at 7, Tony's crew showed up with tool belts jangling, their laughter filling the air as they hauled out old carpet and hammered in fresh beams. The scent of sawdust and fresh paint replaced the musty odor that had lingered since Helen's absence. I kept myself busy, not just watching, but pitching in. It reminded me of my days on construction sites, drawing lines on blueprints and then seeing them rise into steel and concrete. Only this time, the project was my own life. By the end of the first week, the transformation was visible. The yellowed wallpaper came down, revealing crisp, gray walls. New hardwood gleamed under recessed lighting. My living room looked less like a forgotten relic and more like a page torn from an architecture magazine. The kitchen, once cluttered and outdated, now shone with stone countertops and sleek appliances. Even the bathroom had a heated floor, something Helen had always dreamed of. Victor stood in the doorway one evening, hands on his hips. "Al, this doesn't look like your house anymore. It looks better." I laughed, genuinely laughed. That's the point. Meanwhile, I kept refining myself. Miguel at the salon became my new ally. He styled my hair with practiced ease, and each time I looked in the mirror, I saw less of the slumped widower and more of the man I used to be. The new glasses with thin metal frames made my eyes look sharper. A watch, A gift to myself, the first in decades, rested on my wrist, ticking with quiet confidence. One afternoon, I tried on a tailored blazer in front of the mirror and caught myself smiling. Not just at the clothes, but at the man inside them. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was hiding from the world. The final touch came with the yard. Victor's crew laid fresh sod, planted neat shrubs, and installed a small fountain that burbled cheerfully by the walkway. Neighbors slowed down to stare, some even waving in surprise. "Looks like Mr. Hampton's finally fixing up the place," I heard one say. And instead of shrinking under the comment, I stood straighter. By the second Friday, the work was complete. I walked through my home in awe. The rooms glowed with soft light, the furniture fit perfectly, and my collection of bridge models, once scattered in dusty corners, now sat proudly in glass cases like museum pieces. That night, Victor and I sat in my new living room, sipping wine from crystal glasses I'd bought on a whim. So he said, "What's the plan?" I leaned back, letting the cushions cradle me. "Dinner. I'll invite Marissa, Graham, and Lydia here. Let them see it with their own eyes." Victor grinned. And when their jaws hit the floor, "Then," I said, swirling the wine, "I'll remind them that respect isn't about a haircut or a cashmere coat. It's about the man beneath it all." He raised his glass. Now that's the Alfred I remember. The next morning, I called Marissa. Her voice was hesitant, guilty even. "Dad, I've been trying to reach you. I'm so sorry about the park." "It's all right," I interrupted calmly. "I'm not angry, but I would like us to have dinner. Here, Saturday evening, 6 o'clock. She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Positive," I said firmly. "Bring Graham and Lydia. We'll eat, talk, be a family again." "Okay," she whispered, almost relieved. "I'll tell Graham." When I hung up, I looked around the house one more time. Everything was ready, the table, the lights, the wine, even Helen's silver candlesticks polished until they gleamed. This wouldn't just be dinner. It would be a lesson, and I couldn't wait to see their faces when they walked through that door. Saturday evening arrived crisp and cool, the kind of fall night when the air feels sharp in your lungs. By 5 o'clock, the catering crew had already transformed my kitchen into a battlefield of aromas, garlic, sizzling, and butter beef, roasting with rosemary, fresh bread warming in the oven. The dining table, once cluttered with unpaid bills and tools, now gleamed under a white linen cloth, set with polished china and crystal glasses. Helen's old silver candlesticks, polished until they caught every flicker of light, stood like sentinels at the center. Upstairs, I adjusted my blazer in front of the mirror. The man staring back didn't look like the widower who had slumped through the park only 2 weeks earlier. My hair was neatly styled, my beard trimmed close, the lines of my face sharp rather than sunken. A silk tie, understated but elegant, sat perfectly against my shirt. For the first time in years, I felt like the Alfred Helen used to call her proud gentleman. At precisely 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. My heart thudded once, then steadied. I straightened my shoulders and opened the door. Marissa froze on the threshold, eyes wide, lips parting in shock. "Dad," she whispered. Behind her, Graham's jaw tightened as though he'd bitten into something sour. He tried to mask it, but disbelief flickered in his eyes. Lydia, bless her, let out a delighted squeal and threw herself into my arms. "Grandpa, you look amazing." I laughed, hugging her tight. "Good evening. Come in." As they stepped inside, their gazes swept the transformed hallway. The new hardwood gleamed under soft lighting, and the walls, once faded and peeling, now shone in warm shades of gray. Graham's eyes darted from the framed artwork to the sleek furniture as though trying to calculate the cost in his head. "What happened here?" Marissa finally breathed. "Just a little remodeling," I said casually. It was time. In the living room, the reaction was even stronger. Lydia twirled in a circle, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. "It's like a magazine spread," she exclaimed. "Grandpa, this is incredible." Marissa turned slowly, touching the edge of a glass display case that held my old bridge models. When did you do all this?" "In the last couple of weeks," I replied, pouring wine into glasses, with some help from old friends. Graham cleared his throat. "That must have cost a fortune." "Not as much as you think," I said smoothly. "Connections help. I may be retired, but people still remember the projects I've managed." Lydia plopped herself onto the new sofa and bounced a little. "This is so comfy, Grandpa, it doesn't even squeak." I handed Marissa and Graham their glasses and raised my own. "To family. May we never forget what truly matters." Marissa clinked hers nervously, while Graham hesitated before finally touching his glass to mine. His eyes flicked toward the wine label, reading it quickly before taking a sip. I hid a smile. Some habits die hard. "Dinner's almost ready," I said. "But first let me show you the dining room." When they entered, even Graham couldn't disguise his shock. The table stretched long and elegant, set for four, the crystal catching the light of the chandelier. Steam from the kitchen drifted in, carrying the scent of roasted beef and herbs. Lydia gasped. "This is like a fancy restaurant, it's home," I corrected gently. For a moment, none of them spoke. Marissa's eyes glistened and she pressed a hand to her mouth. "Dad, I don't understand. Why now? Why all of this?" I took a sip of wine before answering. Let's just say recent events gave me perspective, and as we moved toward the table, I could feel it, the tension, the questions simmering just beneath the surface. Dinner hadn't even started, but the confrontation I had been waiting for was already at the door. Dinner began in silence. The caterer served the first course cream of mushroom soup with truffle oil and left us alone at the table. The silver spoons clinked softly against porcelain. Lydia slurped happily, oblivious to the tension, while Marissa dabbed nervously at her napkin. Graham sat stiff-backed, chewing with exaggerated care, his eyes darting between the crystal glasses and the chandelier as though cataloging each expense. I waited until the main course arrived. A roasted prime rib, pink and tender, with garlic potatoes and green beans glistening with butter. The aromas filled the room, but no one lifted a fork until I cleared my throat. "I suppose you're wondering why I invited you here." I began resting my hands on the polished wood. Marissa's eyes flicked to mine, worried. "Dad, you don't have to explain." "Yes," I interrupted gently. "I do." I looked first at Lydia. Her eyes, bright and steady, reminded me of Helen's. "2 weeks ago, your father called me an old beggar. He said I didn't belong in the family photos. Do you remember that?" She nodded, her small hands tightening around her fork. "I do." And he was wrong. I turned my gaze to Graham. He shifted uncomfortably, but I pressed on. "I've thought about those words every day since. They cut me deeply, not because they were true, but because they revealed how little respect you have for me." Alfred Graham started, but I held up a hand. "Let me finish. I am 67 years old. I have built bridges, schools, hospitals, structures that stand longer than any photo. I raised a daughter, paid off a home, buried a wife I loved more than life itself. And yet in that park, I was reduced to a caricature, an embarrassment to be cropped out of the picture. Marissa flinched, tears pricking her eyes. Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have spoken up. You should have, I agreed, though. My voice was steady. But you didn't. And that silence hurt more than Graham's words. For a moment, the only sound was the fountain outside, its gentle trickle reaching through the open window. I let the weight of my words settle. Then I leaned back, folded my hands, and softened my tone. This dinner, this house, this transformation, none of it was to prove I'm wealthy or stylish. I didn't do this to fit your image, Graham. I did it to remind myself and all of you that dignity isn't something you can strip away with an insult. It's built like the bridges I designed, steel deep in the ground. You can't see it, but it holds everything together. Graham's face flushed. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he muttered, I spoke out of turn. It was cruel. It was, I said plainly. And I want to hear you say it to Lydia, too. She defended me when her own parents did not. Lydia's eyes widened. Graham looked at her, his expression faltering. I'm sorry, Lydia, he said at last. What I said about your grandfather was wrong. She crossed her arms. You should be ashamed. Grandpa's done more in his life than you ever will. A sharp sting of pride welled up in my chest. I squeezed her hand. Thank you, sweetheart. Marissa reached across the table, her fingers trembling as they touched mine. Dad, please forgive me. I was scared of causing a scene, but in trying to keep the peace, I hurt you. That's the last thing I wanted. I looked at her, my daughter, my flesh and blood, and nodded slowly. I forgive you. But understand this, never again will I accept silence as respect. If you want me in your life, it must be as your equal, not as a shadow. The candles flickered, casting our faces in soft light. For the first time that evening, the tightness in my chest loosened. Now I said, lifting my glass, let's eat while it's still warm. This time, when we dug into the meal, the silence was gone. Lydia chattered about school, Marissa laughed through her tears, and even Graham relaxed his fork, moving with less stiffness. The lesson had been delivered, and the dignity reclaimed. After they left, silence filled the house again, but it wasn't the hollow silence I had grown used to since Helen passed. No, this was different. The air still carried the faint aroma of roasted beef and red wine. The silver candlesticks glimmered faintly, their flames finally burned down to ash. I leaned back in my chair, hands resting on my stomach, listening to the distant hum of traffic on Lakeshore Drive. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Not because Graham had finally muttered an apology, nor because Marissa had wept across the table, but because I had spoken my truth. Plainly. Without rage, without self-pity, just the raw steel of a man reclaiming his dignity. I rose and wandered into the living room. The hardwood gleamed under the new lighting, the bookshelves neat and orderly, my model ships resting inside glass cabinets, like treasures in a museum. I paused before Helen's photo on the mantel. Her smile, soft, knowing, seemed to meet mine. You'd have laughed tonight, I whispered. You'd have said, about time, Alfred. About time you stopped letting them walk over you. Her picture didn't answer, but I could almost feel her presence. For months, maybe years, I had shrunk into the role of widower, letting myself blend into the wallpaper. Tonight I remembered I was more than that. But as I looked around at the polished surfaces and fresh paint, a thought nagged at me. Was all this transformation of my house, my clothes, myself, truly for me? Or was it just to show Graham he was wrong? I moved into the study and sat at my old oak desk, the one piece of furniture I hadn't replaced. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and scribbled down 2 columns. Reasons to sell the house. Too big for one man. Too many memories of Helen that sometimes weighed me down. Fresh start in the city. New people, new life. Reasons to stay. Lydia's laughter echoing in the halls. The creak of the front steps I'd built with my own hands. The oak tree in the backyard where Marissa once carved her initials. And Helen. Always Helen. I stared at the page until the words blurred. The truth was, both lists had power. The house freshly renovated was worth a fortune. A downtown apartment in one of those glittering towers would certainly be easier, sleeker, more in line with the life Graham thought respectable. But when Lydia had clung to my arm in the garden earlier, whispering, "Don't move, Grandpa. Please stay," I had felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just a house of plaster and beams. It was a living archive of everything I had built and everything I still was. To sell it just to prove a point would be another kind of surrender. I set the pad down, rubbed my temples, and chuckled softly. Maybe the old beggar has more fight left in him than anyone thought. The doorbell rang, startling me. I glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. For a moment I thought perhaps Graham had returned, eager to smooth things further. But when I opened the door, it was Lydia, jacket thrown hastily over her pajamas, eyes wide. "Grandpa," she whispered, rushing past me into the warm foyer. "I told Mom I needed to see you. I couldn't sleep." I shut the door behind her, half scolding, half amused. "Does your mother know you're here? She thinks I'm in bed. But I couldn't stop thinking about you leaving this house. Please don't." Her small hands grasped mine tightly. "I don't care about fancy apartments or city lights. I just want this place to stay ours. Yours. Where I can always find you." Her words pierced me deeper than Graham's insult ever had. I bent down, kissed her forehead, and said quietly, "Maybe you're right, Lydia. Maybe this is where I belong." We sat together on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, until she finally drifted off to sleep. I carried her upstairs to the guest room and tucked her in, pulling the quilt over her small frame. Back downstairs, I looked again at Helen's photo. "Well," I murmured, "I think our granddaughter just made the decision for me." The weight in my chest lifted completely. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. The following Saturday, the front lawn of my house looked different than it ever had. Not because of the fresh paint on the siding or the neatly trimmed hedges, but because of the people gathered there. A photographer, older, less flashy than the one Graham had hired, was setting up his camera on the grass. Marissa adjusted her hair nervously, smoothing her dress. Graham stood a little awkwardly, but without the stiffness of before. Lydia darted around the yard, pointing out flowers Keith had planted, her laughter carrying like music through the autumn air. I stepped out onto the porch, dressed simply khaki trousers, a navy sweater, polished shoes. Nothing ostentatious, but clean and dignified. My beard was trimmed, my glasses new. I felt comfortable in my skin, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Grandpa Lydia waved at me. "You're in the middle today. The photographer said you're the anchor." The anchor. I let the word settle in me like warm sunlight. For years I had felt like the forgotten corner of the family, tolerated but not honored. Now my granddaughter wanted me at the center. We arranged ourselves by the old oak tree in the backyard, the one Helen used to sit under with a book in summer evenings. I stood in the center, Marissa on one side, Graham on the other, Lydia in front, clutching both my hands. The photographer clicked away. "Now laugh," he called. "Tell a joke, someone." Lydia leaned in and whispered something silly about her math teacher's hairpiece. We all burst out laughing, and in that moment the shudder caught us, not stiff mannequins trying to project wealth, but a family imperfect yet real. When the session ended, Graham came to me quietly. His voice, usually filled with a hint of arrogance, was soft. "Alfred, thank you for giving us another chance, for showing me how wrong I was." I met his gaze steadily. "You were wrong, Graham, but admitting it takes courage. Remember, this respect doesn't come from suits or polished shoes. It comes from how we treat each other." He nodded slowly, like a man storing away a lesson he didn't want to forget. Marissa hugged me tightly afterward. Her tears soaked into my sweater. "Dad, I'll never forgive myself for that day in the park. But I promise I won't ever let silence betray you again." I stroked her hair. "We all stumble, Marissa. What matters is whether we rise better than before." As the afternoon waned, we sat together in the garden sipping lemonade. Lydia curled beside me, her head on my arm. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a leftover branch of the family tree. I felt rooted, strong, seen. Later, when the photographs arrived, one in particular caught my eye. All of us laughing beneath the oak tree, faces open, genuine. I framed it and placed it beside Helen's picture in the living room. Two eras joined together, past and present, memory and renewal. Looking at it, I realized something important. The house didn't need to be sold, nor did I need to prove anything with marble countertops or designer jackets. What I needed was already here: dignity reclaimed, love restored, and the courage to demand respect. I thought back to Graham's words, "old beggar," and I almost smiled. That insult had been the spark that woke me up. Without it, I might have drifted into obscurity. Instead, I had rediscovered my voice. I turned toward Helen's picture, speaking softly, as though she could still hear me. "You were right, love. I gave up too soon. But now I'm back." And to you listening now, I want to ask, have you ever been pushed aside, made to feel invisible in your own family? Have you ever swallowed words you wished you had spoken? If so, let my story remind you it's never too late to stand tall again. If you've stayed with me until now, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from, your city, your state, even your country. I'd love to know. And don't forget to subscribe to Brian Stories for more true tales about family dignity and resilience. Because sometimes the most powerful comebacks don't happen in boardrooms or on stages. They happen in quiet homes, at worn kitchen tables, when someone finally says, "Enough. I matter."